There's a point in each of our lives where we question our sanity, the internal battle between logical reasoning, the voice in your head, and what your eyes are projecting to your brain. When you put it simply, it seems like such a straightforward answer, but there's always that lingering doubt in the back of your mind that will conflict with your sense of assurance. It takes one small thought, one toxic thought that slowly spreads like a malignant tumor throughout your mind that forces you to question everything you once thought was a reality. This is what drives one into madness. Once the battle has begun, it doesn't seem to end. You may be able to keep its malicious endeavors at bay, but it's only temporary. Once insanity has you in its crosshairs, you're forever a target, and like a hungry predator, it waits until the moment of weakness for its chance to strike. You aren't always aware that you're fighting for your sanity, and some never know until it's too late. I pressed the button to ascend to the 9th floor. The elevator dinged, but the awareness of my demand and the sliding metal doors slowly shut in front of me. The overhead light flickered a bit, but this was a usual occurrence at the hospital I worked in, as it was ancient and the elevator maintenance was long overdue. The elevator creaked and it groaned as it struggled to only rise a few feet. Suddenly, the room went black. I was instantly thrown into a panic when a dimmed red light illuminated the room with a sinister glow. I lunged upwards towards the control panel, rapidly smashing the emergency button. I yielded no response from the call box after repeatedly trying to gain contact with anyone on the outside. This was not a pleasant experience, as I've always had a slight fear of small places. Each time I entered this place, I'd have to convince myself that I wasn't going to die. I circled the small, 8x8 room for what felt like hours. I tried several more times to communicate with anyone through the speaker box. It was nothing but silence. This is where I began to panic. I ran my palms up and down the control panel, pressing every button. I tried prying the doors open, but with my bare hands, it didn't budge at all. All I could do was wait. Suddenly, the elevator began to move. The ominous red light overhead continued to glow menacingly. It was unusual how the elevator didn't make any sound as it ascended. The elevator stopped on the next floor. The 2nd floor was the psych ward. When the doors slid open, I wasn't greeted by the usual poorly lit hallway I had come so familiar with. It was darkness. When I started to step towards the exit, deciding to take the stairs instead, a feeling of terror washed over me. It felt like a warning, as if there was a presence telling me to stay away. The same feeling you would get when you were about to enter a place you didn't belong. This suddenly made me feel anxious. The elevator I had once feared now felt like a sanctuary compared to what might have been on the other side of that door. I reached to press the button that would manually close the doors, but was interrupted by a young man entering the elevator. He was wearing a patient's gown and had stitches that vertically stretched across each side of his face. He looked at me and smiled, revealing 2 rows of yellowed teeth. I only stared back at him. When he entered, the doors closed behind him, and he didn't press a button. He just stood there, smiling at me. When the elevator began to ascend once again, he took a step closer. I took a step away and pressed my back against the wall. I was at a loss for words. Something about this man deeply disturbed me. No matter what floor we ended up on, I was going to get as far away from him as I possibly could. But the elevator seemed to be going on forever. There was no marker above the door that told us what floor we were passing, just that horrifying red light. I slowly edged my way towards the controls, keeping my back against the wall while maintaining as much distance from him as I possibly could. He just turned his body, following me with his head with each side step that I took. The man began to play with the stitches on his face, picking at them. I did my best to avoid making eye contact, but his eyes were locked onto me. I was terrified. With his free hand, he reached underneath his gown and started to fondle himself. My assumption was that this was a mental patient who managed to slip away during the power outage. I could only pray that he was just mentally ill and didn't have any violent intent. The man began prying at his stitches, and blood started to run down the sides of his face. He continued pulling at his wounds, tearing his skin apart with his long fingernails. Soon he was now peeling back the skin on his face. I could see the exposed muscle and bone between the waves of gushing blood as he proceeded to tear his skin back, just as if he was peeling the skin from an onion. The man had now half of his face ripped off. His expression never changed. His other hand had transitioned from fondling his genitals to full-on masturbation, and I could see a trail of blood running down his inner thigh. I turned my back to him and started frantically pounding on the door. I screamed and cried for help as he moaned in pleasure behind me. I could hear his feet splash in the puddle of blood below as he started to approach me. I didn't dare turn back and look, as I was mortified by what he had done to his own face. I closed my eyes and clenched my fists. Warm air pressed against the back of my neck as I could tell that he was just inches away from me. I was prepared to turn around and defend myself when the air suddenly went cold. The elevator became silent. When I turned my head to see what had happened, I was shocked to see that the man had vanished into thin air. Him, the blood that was at my feet, and everything, it was gone. This is when I began to sob uncontrollably. I fell to my knees and curled into a ball as I felt all hope exit my mind. I thought I was going to be trapped inside that elevator forever. Was I going mad? Did claustrophobia create these illusions? I didn't have any answers. I didn't even have a guess. All I could do was wait for the nightmare to end. In the midst of my sorrows, I didn't even notice that the elevator had stopped. The door slid open and I could hear footsteps entering the room. A nurse pressed the button marked 8 and patiently stood just a foot away from the doors as the elevators began to ascend. She was humming a familiar tune to herself, completely unaware of what was going on around her. I just sat there and watched until the elevator had arrived to its designated floor. When the doors slid open, flames burst through the threshold, filling the elevator with thick black smoke. It became unbearably hot. I struggled to even obtain one lungful of air. The nurse casually stepped out onto the floor, but before they closed behind her, she turned around and looked at me. Her face had been melted off. There was nothing but a skull with long blonde hair hanging behind it. Her free hanging jaw clattered as if she was trying to speak, but no words came from it. I jumped back from my hands to my knees, onto my ass, and scurried myself backwards, towards the far end of the elevator. Charred hands came out from the flames. They grabbed at the air, trying to get a hold of me. I pushed my back against the wall and tucked my legs into my chest. Finally, the hands retreated back into the flames as the doors began to close. Before the doors sealed the room, I caught a glimpse of the name tag on the breast of the woman's scrubs. It read Mary. The glow of the red light above faded out, and I was shrouded in darkness once again. Suddenly, the elevator became illuminated by a white fluorescent bulbs above. The sounds of grinding metal and worn-out gears never sounded so relieving as they did in that moment. The power had resumed and the elevator began to move. The elevator arrived up to the 9th floor, and I was greeted by 2 angry-looking men in black uniforms. They came at me, attempting to snatch me up by my arms. One of them grabbed me by the left arm, and I managed to slip out of his grasp before the other one could get a hold of me. I bolted down the hall. The uniformed men followed me in pursuit. I ran into an office and locked it, shut the door behind me, knocking over a bookshelf to barricade the door. I dug through the office desk drawer to find a cell phone. I tried to dial 911, but before I could put the receiver to my ear, the door burst open. My pursuers managed to break through the door and get past the barricade. One of them grabbed me by the shoulders, and I sunk my teeth deep into his forearm. The man screamed in pain as I turned towards the other, ready to defend myself. The other man was holding some sort of syringe. I tried to go for his leg, but he managed to stab the sharp steel needle into my neck. My vision started to blur and my whole body became weak. Soon enough, I was on the floor, looking up at the 2 figures towering over me. I blacked out. I woke up to the sound of a woman's voice humming a familiar tune. I looked around my room to see that I was in a hospital bed. Both of my arms and legs were strapped down, forbidding movement of any kind. I panicked as I saw familiar blonde hair of the nurse from the elevator. When she turned around, I was surprised to see that the skin on her face had returned. She was beautiful. That's when I started to recognize her. I knew that I'd seen this woman's face before. Not just once, but several times. She approached me with a slight smile on her face. "Mr. White, you know you've had a hard couple of hours, but it doesn't mean you can't go wandering around the hospital unsupervised," she said with a soft yet scolding tone. I was going to demand for her to let me out at once, but something stopped me. I looked down at what I had been wearing. It was a hospital gown. I wondered how I'd gotten into this in the first place. I tried to tell her that I was an employee. I told her I was her supervisor, but she didn't respond. That's when it all sank in. Exactly when did I get to this hospital? What floor did I enter the elevator on, and why didn't anyone recognize me as their fellow associate? The voice in my head screamed in frustration as I thrashed against my bindings. It tore at my skin, and I could feel the warm, red liquid soak the sheets of the bed. I managed to break free and ran for the door, locked. On the counter beside the door was a medical chart. I saw that my name was written at the top of it, so I made the mistake of taking a closer look. Henry F. Wright, severe schizophrenia, amnesia, and violent tantrums. Repeating episodes. Violent tendencies. Admitted July 2nd, 2013. Patient has a history of delirium and hysteria. At times he is coherent and understanding. When not, patient creates a fictional persona. Do not encourage his behavior. Has frequent episodes in which he believes he's a hospital employee, as well as vivid hallucinations. Patient must be restrained during examination and transport due to his instability. Tests have ruled out any possible triggers for his episodes, other than the East Wing elevator. Patient has a history of escape attempts. use caution when treating. Others have been severely injured while attempting to treat the patient. I couldn't believe it. I was a fucking patient. I fucking work here. I don't know where I am, and it feels as if my memories are slipping away from me. I refuse to believe any of it. There's something going on that they're trying to hide. Maybe I had discovered something that they were trying to cover up. I hid behind the closed door and waited for the nurse to return. When she did, I hit her over the head with a stethoscope and snatched her security card as well as her cell phone. When I entered the hallway, the lights cut out and replaced by the red glow of the emergency lights. I ran to the elevator and hit that button to bring me back to the ground floor. I'm hoping that writing these events that occurred will help me to keep my memories of them. Otherwise, who knows what will happen to me.